couples therapists, without breaking confidentiality, what are some relationships that instantly set off red flags, and do you try and get them to work out? When one person is entirely dependent on the other, especially at a relatively young age. I mean financially and emotionally. These are typically young women, sometimes young men as well, who do not work, do not have children, stay home all day and have no friends or hobbies outside of hanging out with their spouse. Very unhealthy, and a huge red flag. Always ends in a painful and messy breakup. Generally, we try to get them to find a friend, join a community, get a job or volunteer, something to provide them with self-worth and personal fulfillment outside of their spouse. One partner says they're seeking your services to help them determine if they want to stay together, the other partner says they're seeking your services to make it so they stay together. Then it's about highlighting the points and allowing the person who is on the fence decide what they want, since the other person knows. Edit, I am sorry to be reading about how many people experienced being the person who wanted to stay together when their partner was unsure. I hope that, whatever happened, you have found or are finding happiness again. Child and family therapist here, not exactly couples therapy, but there are key family dynamics that set off red flags for interpersonal relationships within a family, whether it is between parents and kids, or simply kids. The most important piece comes from invalidation. This comes in many forms, from gaslighting to just simple denial of another's opinion. Most of the time one or both parties are simply trying to be heard on an emotional level with an event or topic that was brought up, but the other party takes this as a personal attack on their ideals. We've all heard of or know people who will literally disagree with anything you say simply because you said it. That's the invalidation I'm referring to. Cliché moral of the story, attack the problem, not each other. People rarely have the exact same stance in a conflict, but usually, in healthy relationships, have very similar core values. While two parents may disagree on how to parent a child, authoritarian versus authoritative for example, the core value of caring about their children and wanting them to succeed is often the same. By determining they are within the same realm of issue, two parents with different ideals can see themselves as allies in a conflict rather than enemies. Two things that people believe are red flags of poor relationships are the amount of conflicts the couple has and yelling. Neither is inherently a characteristic of good or bad relationships, but may be perceived as more common in bad relationships. The reality of this situation is that healthy relationships actually have a comparable amount of conflicts, but more intensely focus on addressing the core issue rather than the beliefs and self-worth of the other. As for yelling, in this case it's an emotional response to not feeling heard. While not the best response to distress, it also isn't an indicator of poor communication skills. What is an indicator of poor communication is yelling over the other person in an attempt to invalidate their point. Semi-related example, I had two people who were seemingly incredibly upset at each other. Parent A felt that parent B was out of the house too frequently and did not want to be a part of their children's life. Parent B felt that parent A didn't understand how busy their work schedule was. The fight revolved around parent B seemingly not caring about the kids, until parent B explained they felt parent A was better at parenting and felt like they were only escalating the children when they started to parent. Parent A's understanding of the argument quickly changed from "you don't love our children" to "you're scared to let our children down." As you can guess, the tone of the conversation changed dramatically and there was no longer a sense that parent A and B were on opposing sides. The issue instead became helping build confidence in parent B's parenting abilities, which parent A was much more validating and supportive of. Not all cases are this clean-cut by any means, but I figured I'd demonstrate the basic idea of finding core values and attacking an issue together. I'm not a therapist, but my therapist straight-faced told me that there are worse options than divorce. Got divorced and it was the best thing that happened to me. I saw a couple that was doing retaliatory cheating, and telling each other about it. When they got through their anger, they decided to call a truce and made peace. With their level of emotional maturity, I doubt it lasted. I don't know if I helped them or prolonged their suffering. It was their decision to come to counseling, so I think it was the help they wanted. Other clients realize what they really want is divorce counseling. What's the best way to behave civilly and minimize damage to the kids while we go our separate ways? People who approach therapy with the idea that they must convince the therapist that they're right and their partner is wrong. Almost like they're complaining to a parent or boss to have them sort out the problems. Contempt. When I experience true contempt from one in the relationship, I know it is usually over. Look towards a peaceful ending at that point if possible. Relationship therapist here. One of the biggest red flags I see when working with a new couple is when they've totally forgotten the good. Part of relationship therapy is reconnecting a couple with what they like about each other, what initially attracted them to each other, and what the positives are between them. When people come in and they've been so unhappy for so long that they actually can't remember what it was like to be in love, or to even like each other, they're just about hopeless. You don't have to be happy for therapy to work, but if you can't even reminisce about the good times, then the good times are probably over. Edit, this is clearly resonating with some folks, so I'd like to recommend a book. If you find yourself in this situation, check out Hold Me Tight by Dr. Sue Johnson. She gives some solid explanations of how people get into this cycle, as well as some suggestions on how to try and navigate it. Couples in a tit-for-tat arrangement. For example, I cheated so you can have one night to cheat with whomever. Or I violated your trust and did drugs, you can go out and do whatever for one night. It erodes trust and compounds the hurt. An affair that won't end. I've never seen a relationship bounce back where a partner is still in contact with their GF/BF. I don't mean an ex-GF/BF, I mean the person X is having the affair with, or is lying about it. Control to an excessive amount. I most commonly see partners having to send pictures holding up a certain number of fingers or proving that it's a live picture. This is abuse. Overbearing parents and in-laws. I understand there's a ton of cultural nuance here, and I work with couples who have arranged marriages, as well as the South Asian community. However, when a spouse is more allied with their parents and calls them on speakerphone for fights, or often speaks ill of their partner to their parents, I usually see these couples stay very unhappily married for years. It's sad. If it's not abuse and a partner is willing to end an affair and genuinely work on it, I'll help support. I think couples therapy is sometimes helping couples have the courage to voice what they really want, and that may be separation. Edit, added another, and thanks for the awards folks. Edit 2, I can't ethically dive into some of your comments or give specific resources, but get in touch with your local crisis line or community service agency and they can direct you. Wishing all of you the best with your relationships and in-laws and parents. Edit 3, I answered some of the common questions in the comments. I intentionally have to be really vague and I can't comment on specific cases, it's unethical. I won't be able to respond to any more comments because this blew up far more than I ever expected, but thanks for reading. I hope this helps open the door to therapy for you or your loved ones in tough situations. If it's any help, I'm a therapist who goes to their own therapist. Also, some of these situations are nuanced, some are not. I'm not saying sharing your location with your partner is abusive, or that sending a picture to your spouse is. Therapists get a ton of data and history and information that helps us better understand what's going on. Sometimes, there's a dynamic between two people and they can set off a cycle. Read Sue Johnson's books for this, Love Sense and Hold Me Tight. Other times, I think it's unethical to assume a partner was hit because they deserved it or set their partner off. That's not okay. Please reach out to your local agencies and crisis line if you or a loved one needs help. When I see a couple in which one or both of the members are seeking to change something fundamental about the other person, we process where the need for the change comes from and the person with the issue evaluates whether it's a deal breaker for them or not. We work on acceptance and tolerance of others. I also recommend my couples are also in individual therapy on their own. Edit, typing this on my phone. Period after first sentence should be a comma. Edit, thanks for the awards pals. Remember, we wake up every day and decide if we want to choose our partners. A long-term relationship is a multitude of days when you've woken up and said yes. It's very easy to work out when one person knowingly prioritizes their own wants and needs over their partner's. Relationships like this are often doomed because the person simply doesn't care enough to make any meaningful change. I was in couples therapy. At the end of the first session, the therapist asked us to say one nice thing about each other. I went first, said something nice about him. Therapist asked him to say something, and he replied, "My mother always told me if you can't say something nice, say nothing. So I'll say nothing." Felt so sorry for the therapist. And yes, that's when I started planning my exit. I am now very happy in a new relationship and my revenge is to be living my beat life. Very happy. Now smile. Someone else's response made me think of this one. When a partner raises objection to meeting with me individually. During the first session I share that during assessment I like to meet with them both together and once each individually. Occasionally I'll have partners who suddenly become very critical or suspicious about this, asking why I do that, and is it ethical, and the classic "I've never heard of a marriage counselor doing that before?" It goes beyond curiosity or simply inquiring about practice. There is an incredulous and almost panicked tone to it. And sure enough, every single time, they turn out to be some variation of controlling, manipulative, abusive. Edit, just to clarify for a few of the comments, I'm not talking about doing concurrent, ongoing individual and couples sessions. This is just a one-off individual assessment session. My first 3 sessions are usually 1, couples session, 2, partner A individual, and 3, partner B individual. After that we are typically only as a couple, unless another one-off is needed for further assessment down the road. If needed, I refer out for ongoing concurrent individual or pause for more intensive individual. And thanks for the silver and awards. Constant, needless escalation. When I don't think we need this expensive thing is escalated to "you don't really love me." Major problem. It shows up quickly in therapy if you're watching for it. Mostly because the one using this to avoid accountability is almost guaranteed to play this card in relation to therapy itself. Either I had to drag them here or they're just trying to break up with me. What they're doing is avoiding conversation about the issue by blowing it up into a bigger problem than it is, so they can make the other person respond to their feelings rather than dealing with their concerns. My mom is a therapist and she sometimes tells me a little bit about her cases, nothing specific or identifying. She once came home really upset about a case and told me a little bit. Basically, this guy sent his wife in because she was having trouble with the baby. He came with her and interrupted her at basically every turn and basically told my mom his wife was bipolar. In another session the patient admitted she almost felt angry with the baby, and herself because she knew she would be a terrible mother. Her husband had been saying it since she got pregnant. My mom told me it became almost instantly clear that the husband was manipulative and abusive, and probably trying to stop her from connecting with the child. As soon as my mom suggested she was angry with her husband and not her baby, all of their future sessions were cancelled. Not my client, but I had to watch as my own roommate dealt with her fiancé. He was controlling her, physically/activities/financials. Continuously dismissing her feelings/assessments/opinions. Fiancé would revert to baby talk, speaking to roommate like she was an uneducated child, daddy knows best type of gaslighting garbage. See, trying to hide his narcissistic tendencies behind his good church boy exterior. This was all happening in my condo while she was waiting to move out and marry him. I usually tried to stay out of their issues, but one afternoon I softly encouraged her, saying I agreed with her. An argument I'd witnessed earlier in the day. She came back that night after the fiancé convinced her that I was jealous and was trying to break them up so I could have him. She barely talked to me again until she moved out. Sadly, they did get married, have 2 kids, and she's a completely isolated stay-at-home mom. I don't even want to imagine what it's like for her at home. I'll just say that if you find yourself screaming "I'm not fucking yelling at you," you might have a communication problem. Edit, I want to add a more thoughtful note, but I should also mention that I mainly work with individuals. Similar to what others have said, the reddest of flags for me is when clients try to get me to take sides. I can understand why people may do that every now and then during more difficult discussions, but if it happens consistently, it's a huge problem. There are plenty of reasons that people may do this, but the reality is that therapy is meant to foster cooperation between partners. Feeling like you need the therapist on your side indicates you're approaching the relationship as a competition, not a cooperative interaction, and nothing good comes from that. Also, I once had a supervisor who did a great deal of couples work tell me that it has such a bad success rate because people rarely come before the relationship has crossed the point of no return. Unfortunately, that seems to be a very accurate description. Whataboutism. Instead of taking ownership and responsibility for their contribution to the degradation of the relationship, one or both parties simply point out an example of the other exhibiting a similar behavior. It's a red flag because it illustrates their lack of self-awareness and poor communication skills. Communication is key when trying to mend a tattered relationship, because without respectful communication the conflict recovery process can never begin. In the conflict recovery model, both parties agree to the terms under which they will communicate: no yelling, no interrupting, no "I told you so's," etc. Each party gets a chance to share how the other's actions make them feel. Then they each propose their solutions and identify where they made assumptions or where they got triggered and why. Then they identify where they're willing to compromise. Next, we create an actionable plan with deadlines and we monitor the progress to see if the proposed solutions were effective. Everything can go to shit, but once communication stagnates, you're in real trouble. So even if you're arguing, you're still doing okay, you just need to work on how you're communicating. I'm an MFT, marriage and family therapist, and for me, an unofficial litmus test is when I ask at some point in the first few sessions how the couple met. If there is absolutely no positive effect from either person, no one even cracks a smile, or they just give me a single sentence answer, "We met at a party," that's usually a signal they've been so unhappy so long, or the conflict is so overwhelming that they can't access those good warm fuzzy feelings from the beginning. I partly wanted to do this job because I'm a romantic at heart and love hearing real love stories, and for the most part, hearing about their first few months together is an actually fun and illuminating part of therapy. Only a few times have I seen the flat or no effect couples, and it breaks my heart every time. I remember learning in grad school that most couples who come for therapy have lived unhappily for an average of 7 years before trying to get help. They come for that first session, and if they aren't cured after that, most think that therapy doesn't work and don't come back. To anyone who may be considering individual or couples therapy as a result of this thread, go for it, and be prepared for it to take some time and energy from you and your therapist. High conflict relationships. If frequent and bitter conflict began a few months, or less, after the relationship began, and continued, relationship therapy is going to be a shit show, won't be helpful. Either the conflict will continue indefinitely, or come to an end. Not just my opinion. The research supports this. Edit, if you've been there, I'd be interested to hear some stories about this, and so would other Redditors. If you were able to fix a high conflict relationship like this, that would be an interesting story too. I'm not a couples therapist, but I recommended a couples therapist to a co-worker for some premarital counseling. My partner and I had really enjoyed our premarital sessions from this super nice therapist, and when a girl from my work got engaged, she asked for his number. The day after their first session, I got a call from the girl saying, "I can't believe you sent me to this horrible, invasive, rude counselor." I was in a panic. Oh no. What happened? She explained. We went in there and sat down, and the first thing he asked was, "So, why do you want to get married? How rude is that? How dare he?" That's when I realized that maybe their relationship wasn't going to pan out. They called off the wedding a few months later. All these responses have made me so much more grateful for my younger sister, who pestered me until I was in tears of anger to leave my ex. Within a week I could see how much better my life was without him. I'll never be able to tell her how much it means to me that she was ready for me to hate her, as long as it meant I was away from him. As a clinical psychologist, I focused mainly on behavioral medicine and cognitive assessment, but did my fair share of marriage/couples work. Refusal or inability to compromise is a ginormous red flag, one that, I believe, is empirically validated. Compromise is a significant predictor of satisfaction in relationships, and it plays an important role in the long-term success of marriages and relationships in general. I'm reading through these as a mental checklist to keep in check my own actions, not just my partner's. Thanks everyone for sharing. My mom is a couples therapist and she says there are some people that she has told you're not going to work out on the first couple sessions. Obligatory, not a therapist but my own experience in therapy. My wife and I, separated now, went to couples counseling where it was a husband-wife counseling team. I thought that would be great, since it may help us open up more having a member of both sexes there. My wife was hesitant about couples counseling, but agreed to try it. We had our initial session together and it was cold and difficult, as expected, and my wife said she still wanted to leave, but they convinced her to try a few more sessions to see if anything clicked as we opened up. We had an individual session the next time, and I thought it went fantastically. I gained a completely different understanding of intimacy, not sexual, but emotional and relational, and I was jazzed to start working at putting it into practice. My wife came out with tear stains and sat in her car crying before she finally left for home. We drove separately because she was coming from work and I from home. Our next appointment was another individual session. The male counselor and I were talking again, and he started digging into my expectations and desires in the relationship, what I loved about wife, etc. He point blank asked me, do you feel wife is a good match for you in life, and that you want to continue this relationship? And I was a little off put, but figured yeah, it's probably a good thing to establish that right off the bat, so I answered emphatically yes, and he just looked heartbroken and so very sad. I knew pretty well right then that we were toast. Wife admitted her affair the day before our next session and left. Good question. I doubt I have much to add that others haven't already said, but the biggest one I notice is respect. Respecting space, boundaries, feelings, interests, relationships are also important, and lack of respect by either person for the other is going to mean big problems. I would definitely try to help them work through it, but it's hard to point out to someone that something they are doing is hurting the other. Which leads to my second red flag, lack of communication lol. I'm a therapist, newer to couples counseling, but one of the flags I've seen is one person digging their heels in and not accepting any feedback or suggestions, then that person tells me and partner that they are trying. I called him out on it, said that he needed to evaluate what he's willing to do and not do. Needless to say, didn't hear back from them. Another weird one is separating without a plan. All that's gonna do is teach you how to live without each other emo. I would ask them, okay, how do you know when the separation works? I dunno, when I start missing them I guess is what I typically hear. Saying, directly to each other, I don't love you. I am just here to try and like you enough to stay together. And the other person replaying with good. We can do that. Partners refusing to listen. Absolutely deafening themselves to certain explicit statement. Active physical abuse and each person admitting it and trying to be okay with it. Name calling in session, and when I intervene they both get mad at me, grimacing face, complete disrespect and true contempt with each other. Yet refusing to accept their relationship is over. I could keep going. These are obvious red flags. Gottman's research does a good job of answering the opposite of this question. He studies what factors predict a couple will stay together. He has like 90% accuracy. Velp, they used meth together on a regular basis. They continued to cheat on one another. Fighting in front of their kids, cheating in front of their kids, and oh wait, meth in front of their kids. When doing couples work, your client is the relationship itself, not person A or B. So of course we try to work it out, even knowing in our head there's no way in Fucksville will these toxic mfers ever work this out. And believe me, I tried. I tried so hard, until this thing happened that I will never forget and tell my students about all the time. Person B was like, why don't you tell him, me, about you sleeping with your nigger BF? Quick note, I'm black and will type this word out to illustrate the hurt this word can cause. At that point I was just like, nah, fuck this. My dissertation was finished, I had maybe a month left at this spot before leaving the state. I just told them that we're done today and advised them to seek another therapist at the front desk because I was no longer able to accommodate them. Told the boss and I was Gucci. Really, I just wanted to reach over and slap the absolute crap out a dude. Other instances were the typical one person wants to save the relationship while the other person is halfway out the door. It's really depressing actually, because you feel for that individual and they are trying, but that other person has other plans. Many of the times the other person was actively cheating and the spouse either knew, or that person would tell me low-key after the session. I hated couples counseling. You all never came to me as a first step, only a last resort. I was just talking about this case today. Years ago when I was starting out, I had a female client come in and she reported anxiety, depression, etc. because her ex-husband was bothering her. I thought that was completely average and normal, so I asked her about it. She recounted many times that her and the ex clashed. I said, you know, you don't have to interact with him and maybe just distancing yourself is the way to go. Then she told me that they still lived together and had no plans of moving. The red flag, indicted I was dealing with two crazy people. Reading all of this just makes me realize how lucky I was to muster up the power to break up with my ex. I knew she was horrible and toxic towards the end of things, but holy shit, it's worse than I thought. My grandaunt was a couples therapist for many years. Now she volunteers at her church counseling couples. She's my relationship sage. Number of red flags she's told me about spouses who don't sleep together without a justifiable reason. As in, not due to work conflicts or medical reasons, but because one spouse just doesn't feel like going to bed alongside the other. Lack of intimacy, both sexual and non-sexual, will lead to the two drifting apart. When one spouse has a close relationship with a member of the opposite sex who doesn't like the other spouse, the old he or she's just a friend. If it doesn't lead to cheating, it still will usually cause unneeded strain that will break apart the relationship. One that initially surprised me, we're staying together for the kids. It leads to an unhealthy mindset where the couple sees the children as a burden and believe that by remaining in an unhealthy relationship, it will somehow make the kids turn out alright. Kids are smarter than you think, and if mom and dad don't love each other, they'll pick up on it. If the kids are really the priority, either learn to fix the relationship, or end it. In premarital counseling, when the couple states that they're saving themselves for their wedding night, and then one or both confides privately that they're not a virgin and the other has no idea. In broader terms, when a couple isn't honest with each other about their sexual history. So many reasons that's unhealthy, I can't even begin to list them all, but the biggest is that honesty is the most solid foundation on which to build a relationship. If you're afraid of what your partner will think, ask yourself if you want to deal with it now or later. Deal with it now. The biggest problems she's dealt with are when it's clearly the fault of one member of the relationship and the other desperately wants to fix the issue. Like in the first instance, she told me of a couple where she understood that the wife wanted out of the relationship, but didn't want to directly confront her husband about it, while the husband thought the issue was just a minor problem. Turns out, the wife had to actually cheat in order for the husband to realize how serious things were, which led to him ending up on antidepressants and contemplating suicide. From what she told me, that one ended in acrimonious divorce, but she never told me what became of either party. Something she emphasizes is that people are often blind to the red flags that a therapist can spot right away. Such is the nature of being a trained professional. It's why she recommends people see a counselor even if they don't think their issues are that deep. It's not shameful to ask for help, she always says. I've seen individuals but did coursework in couples therapy. It's always a dooming sign when one of the patients doesn't want to be there and is unwilling to try. Those never end well. I'm in marriage counseling. And the very first session restored hope in a relationship where divorce was threatened in every fight. The moment hope was restored was when we both immediately owned our own shit and said we just want to learn how to love each other again. The therapist was like, you both want to do better, you both want things to get better, we can work with this. I got the impression he had dealt with people who just want to be right, with an audience. So glad that wasn't us. The reason I'm responding is because he supported that thought, saying, some couples are doomed because they just want an audience for their resentment, not help moving past it. Edit typo. A friend from HS's parents went to counseling. The therapist probably realized it wasn't going to work when she started fucking the husband. Edit, to whoever gave this a wholesome award, thank you. Needed the laugh. Not me, but my dad was a pastor. He did premarital counseling. He had a couple who wanted him to marry them. During their premarital counseling it came up that the guy was possessed by a demon that caused him to hit her sometimes. My dad met with her in private and explained that nothing supernatural was happening, that she was in an abusive relationship, that getting married would not get rid of his demon. He told her that how their relationship was now was while he was on his best behavior, it would only get worse after they were married. My dad refused to marry them and recommend he get therapy. This thread made me realize how toxic and abusive my last relationship was. It makes me sick to this day when I think of the gaslight and manipulations I went through to cover up his lies, cheating and abuse. Late to the party, but here goes. My most favorite exercise in couples counseling is to have them listen to 45 seconds minus 1 minute of instrumental music. Think Lorena McKennitt, Greensleeves or something like that. Music that people don't really usually listen to. Then I ask person A to tell person B what they imagined while they were listening to the music. Then person B shares the same. Then we listen to the same music again, but I ask person A to try and see what person B, and vice versa, imagined, and pay attention to what they think/feel when they do that. Interesting dynamics come up immediately. I'll share my own personal story here from when my own couples therapist did this with an ex and me. Oh, I imagined myself wearing a long, billowing green dress walking through a green valley. Think Scotland or Ireland. A remote castle was at the top of the hill and my scarf was flying in the wind. There was a gently, bubbly stream somewhere there too. I imagined myself on a cliff with the ocean waves crashing violently on the rocks. There was a storm with lightning and thunder. I was cold. Awesome therapist, credit where credit is due, he was awesome. Okay, let's do that again. But try to see if you can visualize what the other person imagined. Okay, ? Music clip played again. Me, inner thoughts, okay, so the cliff. Yeah, I can see that, but come on now. A storm and violent waves? No way. Bubbly stream is so clear here. So waves and. What did he say again? Cold? That's so stupid. It's a nice, warm day, maybe a bit windy, but if it evoked cold I would have never imagined myself in a dress. Wait, I'm supposed to be imagining his scenario. It just didn't fit. Why did he? When will this be over? Okay, so tell me how that went. I tried, I really did, but I started visualizing her scene and it was so off. I mean, I'll give her the green and all, but me, why do you always invalidate what I perceive? Never mind that. I had just done the same in my head with him BTW. So, anyone want to analyze the twisted dynamics that were at play during our whole relationship there? I laugh gently while I tell you guys this, but they were very clear from the outside and very confusing and combative from the inside. Also and sometimes not so humble, all therapists should experience couples counseling. Not only did it change the way I practiced it myself, but it literally changed the way I built future relationships. And yes, this is a glowing endorsement for that part of therapy that I choose not to practice a lot. If one is ever on the fence about going to couples counseling, know that while it might not save this relationship, it will save you in subsequent ones. It will give you the tools to communicate with other partners in the future, or will give you insight in how you love and relate to others in ways individual counseling sometimes doesn't. Anyway, I adopted this exercise into my repertoire, and am continually amazed at how revealing it is. Big red flag when we do this: person J has trouble expressing what they visualized, person K has zero trouble. Then person J reports they can 100% see what person K visualized, and person K is very critical of person J's experience or heavily indulgent. Oh yeah, I saw it. What did you think while visualizing it? I was doing the exercise correctly. Symbiotic relationships, codependency, narcissism and abuse are things I immediately screen for if this is the result. Finally, don't go to couples counseling if your partner is abusive. It doesn't work. It won't work. You will give the other person the tools and language to make you feel even worse, and there will be heavy retaliations at home if you reveal the truth. Not worth it. Go by yourself if you know or suspect abusive markers in your relationship. What I loved about our marriage counselor is from the start he said his job wasn't to try to get us to stay together but guide us for us to figure if we should be together. I don't focus on couples counseling, but I do have some couples therapy session from time to time. If you are in a relationship, some advice that will help you out. You will typically find yourselves in 3 metaphorical positions. Face to face, when you are here you are feeding into each other, building each other up and communicating. Side by side, this is when you both are working together on a problem to find a solution. It's not forcing one to do all the work, but you both are taking responsibility back to back. This is the position you never want to be in because you take your focus off each other and you go your own directions. You either end up with one person pulling the other or a gap is formed. This position also says I don't care about your input. If I get a couple in position 3 and they refuse to move to position 2 or 1, that is a pretty big indicator the relationship will fail. Searching for any identifiers of when me and my ex-wife tried therapy. Not a relationship therapist, but once worked with a woman whose boyfriend had sexually assaulted a client while he was at work, but she was convinced it was just a misunderstanding, so I knew that was a relationship that wouldn't last and that she struggled to pick stable partners. I was right. As long as there is no abuse, and all parties still have feelings of love or regard for the other, just about any relationship can be salvageable with a re-establishing, or in some cases, establishing for the first time, healthy communication patterns. Of course, all parties have to want to put in the work as well. Man shrugging, edit, didn't expect to get this much conversation going, but glad so many people have felt comfortable talking about this. I want to clarify one thing: not wanting to put in the work on a relationship does not automatically make someone the villain. It is very possible to decide from a place of compassion, and even love, that you and your partners simply are at separate places in life, have opposing values, or perhaps are just not compatible. It can be the case that deciding to let go is an act of compassion. My original intent was only to say that when both parties are committed to fixing a non-toxic relationship, I've seen a lot of seemingly unreconcilable issues be settled. Contempt. Nothing else spells the end like that particular emotion. We need a serious tag for this op. Good question though. God, I'm so fucking defective. That's how I feel reading the comments. Lol. One of the big red flags I look for is meta conversation. Example to use for sake of discussion: partner 1 is mad THQT, partner 2 doesn't help out at home more. There are always 2 levels of communication. One is the direct message intended, please clean up the dishes, and the second is communication about the communication, I expect you to do what I ask. When communication about the communication turns meta, the message gets muddled and a power struggle erupts from misunderstandings. Tone, body language, and the way one responds to the request. all become the focal point. If the arguments don't fall into meta-arguments, then that's a sign the couple has a strong foundation, and the work is usually about exploring expectations of the relationship or readjusting roles. If they fall into meta-arguments, it's a sign the couple needs to build up their foundation, which will likely lead to them able to adjust the roles themselves once that happens. Two different approaches, same base issue at hand. As a therapist, it's not my place to try to get them to reunify. That takes their power and gives it to me instead of me teaching them skills to make their own informed decision. That being said, whenever one half of the couple comes in and says they're there because their spouse made them come, it's pretty rare that they decide to stay together. My father-in-law is a couple therapist. He tells me all the interesting couples when I visit. I low-key hope I can find a way to go back to school and do what he does. He told me about a couple with a big age gap. Like 20 years. Story went on about him being an average guy and her being a train wreck. Drugs, abuse at a young age, etc. She gets clean and starts dating this older guy. A little weird, but the more I hear this story, I'm waiting for it to connect and make sense. The dude was her teacher in high school. We spoke a long while about that couple. Where you are in your life is a big deal. It's bigger than we make it. If someone wants to be a wild and free 20-something, you cannot expect them to be a settled down, married with children, stay-at-home mom just because you're 40. And that's okay. Therapist here. In my experience, strong healthy relationships are built on two very important qualities, trust and respect. Love is not included in these qualities because love is not a determiner of a strong/healthy relationship. Dysfunctional relationships are still possible among people who love each other. And loving someone isn't the only reason to stay with a person. Many of the clients that I've worked with in the past who are in very dysfunctional relationships have actually stayed solely because of love, but continue to struggle in those relationships because they lack trust and respect. Without respect and trust, most relationships are doomed to struggle or fail. For the couples that I've worked with, I always assess for whether or not trust and respect is present, and then build treatment goals around seeing if it's possible to develop those qualities. If they are not willing or able, then in most cases those relationships are likely to end. Things to be aware of / red flags: any consistent or significant violation of boundaries. Unintentional and minor violations can happen while people are still getting to know each other. Any boundary violation should be discussed. Obviously, any illegal behavior should be an immediate GTFO, no questions asked. Legal intervention may be beneficial or recommended for your safety. Speaking of boundaries, sexual boundaries, one litmus test: does this person ascribe to the following definition of sexual consent? An ongoing, affirmative agreement between two or more people who are sober, cognitively/legally able to provide consent, and under no duress. Explicit: do this or I'll kill you, or implicit: if you don't do what I want, you'll get a bad grade/job review/kicked out of your residence, etc. That agreement is specific to that time/place to engage in specific actions. If someone wants to do something different or additional, it requires obtaining consent for the change or addition. Substance abuse that is chronic, severe, or someone who is unwilling to disclose their use habits, or someone who consistently uses more than they claim or intend to. Not that anyone with a substance use disorder isn't a good person, but any of those may signal potential for distress and drama no one wants in their life. If someone discourages you from spending time with friends, family, or other loved ones, or rewards you for not seeing/talking to loved ones. Isolation is a common tactic of abusive individuals. Generally speaking, individuals who have experienced complex trauma will have a very difficult time maintaining stable relationships. Complex trauma is the term for when an individual has experienced so much distress/trauma that no specific event can single-handedly account for their way of thinking or relating to the world. They may not even recognize their upbringing as traumatic. Example: someone who was raised by abusive people or people who ignored abuse, experienced homelessness, poverty, and survived sexual assault all before 18 would be considered a complex trauma case. These individuals can form meaningful and lasting relationships, but it takes a lot of clinical work. Anyone that tries to control where you go, who you see, or what you do. A relationship built on trust and mutual respect won't include restricting one another. Abusive partners tend to follow a cycle that includes being a wonderful partner, at times, being rude/mean/an asshat, big outbursts, and promises that aren't kept to behave in a more pro-social manner. Other forms of emotional manipulation such as gaslighting, putting someone down, or making the other person feel like they are the only person in the world who can care for you. Mother Gothel from Tangled is a good example. Okay, there's a lot more, but that's off the top of my head late at night. Hope this helps. Active independence from each other is my number one sign of this marriage is about to spiral downward. As soon as I realize a couple is doing things separately, like applying for car loan without the other's knowledge, or planning personal trips without consulting the other, I know that the couple is soon doomed. I hate to be that person, but what does it mean when your spouse fears you going places without them? I've recently lost all my mom weight from just being busy and stressed from having kids and whatnot. I'm finally hot again and I'm enjoying it. My husband, who I thought would be thrilled, is not so much. He is definitely attracted to me, but he is also very insecure. Now he seems super vigilant about where I'm going and how long I'm gone, or if I was alone. He literally won't let me go anywhere alone anymore. If I try to do so, he gets suspicious. Dude. I'm literally just getting groceries. When my ex-wife and I went to counseling, he did this on our third session. He met with her first. When he was meeting with me, all he had to say was, "You need to get a lawyer immediately." Vengeful acts. They did X, so I did Y, so they learn. Being unable or unwilling to compromise or concede points for the betterment of the relationship. For example, at some point in a long-standing argument where neither party is willing to concede, a compromise is needed. When it's the same person in the relationship always hell-bent on being right all the time, that's a red flag. Most couples understand the importance of compromise, so if there is a partner who only thinks about themselves and how important it is for them to be right, that's a major issue. That either means that the person isn't thinking about how this is also an important point for the other partner, or even worse, doesn't care. Being obsessed with being in the right and only being in the right versus listening to your partner's needs breeds frustration and a relationship power differential where one partner is just catering to the other. I'm not a couples therapist, but I've done family counseling. One red flag I see a lot is someone trying to win me over. I can smell it often within seconds of meeting a family who's trying to manipulate the situation to their advantage. Realizing why and whether it's malicious or just anxiety takes longer. The male party in the couple gifted me chocolates on Valentine's Day during the couples session. For starters. EFT couples therapist here. One thing to be clear on is that our aim isn't to keep a relationship together no matter what. It's to help both parties communicate their wants and needs clearly to see if they can build a healthy relationship, or to separate respectfully if not. Not red flags as such, as in this indicates a terminally unhealthy relationship, but signs that worry me are when one partner constantly blames the other for the issues. I've had partners ask me to fix the other person so everything can be fine. Micro-controlling behaviors in session like constantly interrupting, correcting the other partner, e.g. "you're wrong, what happened really was." Obvious stuff like gaslighting, threats of violence, substance use, infidelity. Not respecting boundaries the other partner has clearly set, e.g. going out on boys' night and coming home drunk at 2 a.m. when the agreement was one drink and home for dinner. Anything that signals a lack of respect or contempt for the other partner. These signs generally mean the relationship will fail. Splitting the other partner and children. Hey kids, isn't mum/dad being mean? I'll let you. Attributing problems to the partner's character flaws/personality, like they're lazy, rather than a behavior. Malicious attributions, thinking the partner did something on purpose to hurt the other. So many things. Edit to add :9. If one partner is already clearly checked out, both need to be willing to work and repair. Along these lines, doing it for the children, this can be a reason to try to repair, but not a reason to stay in an unhealthy relationship. Two separated but happy parents are better for kiddies than two together but unhappy ones. When the husband wanted to be the sole translator for his non-English speaking wife, we used a professional translating service. Sigh, this brings up thoughts, feelings and memories I go barely a day or two trying not to think about. I'm not a therapist, but was a patient of one, and this is the situation they dealt with before they basically washed their hands of us and told us that we shouldn't be together. Before I got married, I begged my partner of over 10 years, we got together when I was almost 18, to go to counseling/therapy with me, but he refused. I was incredibly hurt, and unable to understand why he didn't want to sleep with me. We had sex maybe 3-4 times a year at the most. Without sounding big-headed, I knew that I was attractive. When I would go out with friends, I was always having men flirt with me. Even at work, I'd sometimes get little messages from male co-workers left on my desk asking me out. I never encouraged this. I was completely and utterly devoted to my partner. Things got a little better in the months before we married, and I was overjoyed thinking that we had turned a corner and were on our way to being more of what my idea of a happy, loving couple able to physically demonstrate their love would be. Unfortunately, after the wedding, things were worse than ever before. I had always taken care of my appearance, but I started wearing sexy underwear, corsets, stockings, etc. I begged him to tell me what was wrong, but he wouldn't say anything. This truly hurt, as I knew that he would masturbate and watch porn, but wasn't interested in touching me. A year went by without us being intimate even once, despite my attempts to initiate anything, even a kiss, but he wasn't interested. The only affection we shared was hugs or kisses on the cheek. I felt like I was more of a sister than a wife. Again, I asked him to go to marriage counseling, and again he refused. At this time I got a new job. I was headhunted along with close friends from our previous employer. We were required to attend several social events at the beginning, which generally ended with the younger employees going clubbing afterwards. I'm not proud of this, but I met a guy on one of these nights who was incredibly attractive, and who was obviously very interested in me, and a few weeks later I cheated on my ex with him. I was ashamed and told my ex everything, at which point he then decided we needed to go to therapy. Unfortunately, it didn't go well. My ex would spend each session reading out a pre-written script about how sex isn't important in a relationship, and about how badly I'd treated him. I was not allowed to speak, even when the therapist got clearly frustrated and told him I needed to be able to express my thoughts and feelings. Although I'd wanted to try and fix things and was ashamed of what I'd done, I wasn't allowed to talk at all, and this just made me very angry. My ex refused to answer any question about why he didn't want to sleep with me, so in the end the therapist just said that there was no way that our differences could be reconciled. 10 years later I'm still very sad about how things ended, and I'll never stop being ashamed of cheating, but I doubt that we would have been happy even if I hadn't. I went to see a couples therapist with a guy once. I figured the therapist would take his side since the therapist was also his psychology professor. The therapist asked to see me independently for the second visit. He advised me to leave my partner. Best advice from the therapist. Withholding affection in order to get their partner to see how it feels when their feelings get hurt. I take a very direct approach in therapy, so yes, I call it like I see it. I've seen a family that presents everything as alright. That's a red flag. Almost everything is certainly not alright, even in the most functional relationships. In fact, it's one of the most commonly misheld beliefs that there are perfect relationships. To your second question, yes and no. Yes, I do try to get them to work it out, but that's all dependent on what they think, feel, and want to happen. Sometimes, it's just helping them realize what they want. When a partner responds to every criticism with "I do it because I love you," I micromanage how you do household chores because I love you and want you to know how to do it right. I mock and belittle you because I love you and want you to see how silly you're being. I'm overbearing and don't let you do things for yourself because I love you and don't trust you to do it right. I cross every boundary you set because I will do literally anything for people I love. More often than not, I'll do anything for love isn't a badge of honor or proof or dedication. It's a lack of healthy boundaries. Therapist, so you're considering ending the marriage? Wife, I am sick of all the Star Wars puns. Husband, divorce is strong with this one. Both therapists, my husband, ex, and I went to were so fooled by his lies that they focused on my attitudes as the problem. The guy was an abuser, a sexual pervert, and a child molester. He molested our daughter. But he was a very good liar as well. Therapists cannot always tell what's going on. I work in a relatively small city, and one couple I worked with for a few sessions had ties to one of the main firms in town. I won't say what type of firm so it can't be narrowed down. The husband worked there and the wife had another family member who worked there. Met with them for the initial session, and wife's perspective was basically that her husband felt neglected after she had their baby, had a one-time affair, and now she's forgiven him and wants to make it work. Husband confirmed the affair happened once with another worker at the firm. He's surprised wife didn't kick him out, but wants to make it work. Fast forward 2 weeks and I have another new client who, you guessed it, worked at this firm, too. She begins telling me about an office affair that's been ongoing for about a year. I'm sitting there hoping she's talking about someone else and not the husband I had just met with. But no. She mentioned his very unique name, so I knew then that it was going to be a mess. Plus I had to carry on as if I hadn't heard any of this info the third person gave me. Tangled web stuff is not fun. I feel disappointed all the time. It's hard when you have nothing in common with your partner. One thing that's extra hard for me is constant excuse making, like they act like they were so busy during the day. Then you pay for therapy and nothing changes, so now you are paying extra for the same nothing. Fun existence. Not a relationship therapist, but my parents did couples therapy for a while after they got married. One engaged couple stood out to them more than the rest. The dude was a military guy, probably a factor for why they were getting married, and had an extremely dominant personality. The girl was in the process of getting her PhD in psychology. He was soon to be stationed in some foreign country for his military career and the girl was going with him. As a result, the girl was being forced to put her school career on hold until they could come back to the States. One particular story they told in the therapy really shocked my parents. One time when the couple was having dinner with the military man's parents, she said something or other that offended him. This dude bent his fiancée over his knee and spanked her like a child at the dinner table in front of his parents because he felt he needed to punish her for her behavior. It was the only engaged couple my parents advised to not get married. They ended up getting married and who knows what they are up to now. They think about that couple a lot. I think they regret not reporting it as domestic violence. Being rude and inconsiderate. That's the number one, at least for me. If you're any bit rude or inconsiderate, that usually translates to all other aspects of life. Being rude or inconsiderate is not hard to not act on. Imagine what other situations might be. Not a therapist, but my parents once went to couples therapy, but never went back because my dad felt the therapist and my mom were ganging up on him. Definitely one of the first times I realized maybe they weren't the best model for what a relationship looks like. The Gottman Institute has identified what they call the 4 horsemen of a relationship. The Gottmans themselves have been able to predict whether a couple will last after 20 minutes of talking with them. Relevant fantastic book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by John Gottman, which came out of observing 650 plus couples over 14 years. It talks about the patterns among those who stayed together, those who divorced, those who were happy and those who weren't. Illustrates key red flags as well as ones you'd think were, but actually aren't necessarily, like arguing all the time. Plus the 4 horsemen predictors of divorce. Similar to what others have said, when one responds in a way that shuts down the other. For example, in an intake when I'm exploring what is going on and I ask for partner A's perspective and partner B interrupts and says, if you say that again I'm going to leave this session, that's a sign partner A's voice is totally ignored at home. In those cases it can be hard to work it out if partner B doesn't want to see their behavior. They usually stop coming on their own. Yelling is an emotional response to not being heard. I felt this deeply, very deeply. Anything more on this? I wanna show my partner. We had an absolutely great counseling session once that really moved things forward. Our counselor said we were going to spend some time pretending to be the other, and answer questions as each other. Then she asked a bunch of questions and we obviously had to answer from the other person's perspective. She had clearly picked sticking points that we were struggling with. It massively moved things forward. She was great. We haven't been able to go since our son was born, he just turned 2, but we miss it. I feel so stupid for even asking, but what are examples of boundaries? I'm panicking because I know there are things that make me uncomfortable but I don't even know how to word it, and how can I create boundaries if I can't even say what I mean? I'm blanking so hard right now, I don't even know what my boundaries are. Because I co-own a fairly decent-sized company that employs many other professionals, I don't do much clinical work anymore. However, when I did conduct marital therapy, the first several sessions, 3 to 5, would be conducted by meeting with each person individually, then together. Therapists each have their own style. Some will meet with the couple together then separately, some will do the separate meetings only for the first session, some will always meet with them both together and separately, etc. I settled into my paradigm because I found meeting with them separately, then together, allowed me to hear their true perspectives on things prior to meeting with them together, where couples were often reluctant to be completely honest. Everything that was said in the individual sessions was confidential unless that person wanted it brought out in the session together. To answer the ops questions, many of my clients set off various kinds of red flags almost immediately for various reasons. Often, the red flags would pop up in the first individual sessions. As to whether I tried to get them to work it out, the answer is no. Every couple who came in had their own issues seen through their own unique perspectives. They also had their own desired outcomes of therapy. Some couples wanted therapy to improve their communication. Other couples wanted it to help resolve long-standing issues that didn't necessarily threaten the relationship but created friction and tension. Sometimes, couples didn't really want to work it out at all but wanted to work toward both people exiting the relationship with minimal emotional damage. The goal of the therapist is to help clients achieve whatever it is they want or need to achieve. In the words of one of my psychotherapy professors in graduate school, the job of the therapist isn't to carry the client out of the hole. It is to give the client a ladder so they can climb out themselves. To give one example of a couple who seemed doomed from the start, it was a couple, both about 30 old, who had been married for about 5 years. During the first session, I met with the husband for about a half hour and he conveyed to me that he felt like his wife had drifted away from him emotionally and physically. He told me that not only did this hurt him, but it was making him more jealous because he feared that if she no longer had those feelings for him, that she might be susceptible to falling for someone else. He also told me that about 9 months prior, they had moved into a house that they, a few months later, discovered was a few blocks down the street from one of her exes, and that the ex's proximity had really exacerbated his jealousy. When he and I finished, I met with the wife for her individual session. She blurted out almost immediately that she had been having an affair for their entire marriage with that very ex. She went on to say that in order to make the affair easier to carry on, she manipulated her husband into moving to a new house, and then found their current house, which she had already identified, and convinced her husband that it was the perfect home. She was having sex with her ex almost daily, usually when her husband was at work, but sometimes when he was at home. She would run an errand and while out, would drop by the ex's house for a quickie. She said she really didn't love her husband anymore, and although she loved her ex, didn't want to have a relationship with him other than their current arrangement. She was staying with her husband primarily because she didn't want to go back to work and secondarily because she felt sorry for him. Needless to say, things seemed doomed from the start. We went through 2 sessions. At the end of the second session during the couples session, she announced that she didn't think they should come to therapy anymore because they felt like they could work it out on their own, and he somewhat meekly agreed. She said this after her individual session, during which she told me that she had sex with her ex that very morning and thought she was awesome for being able to pull it off. I never saw them again and hoped for the best for her husband, who seemed to be a really decent guy. I didn't have many couples clients in the time I was in private practice, maybe a handful, across the board. If I couldn't get them to agree that there weren't sides and that they were there to talk to one another and not me, it wasn't going to go well. I think that it came down to whether people were more interested in being right than being in a healthy, loving relationship. Love this thread! A few come to mind. I had a couple where there was cheating and the affair had ended, but it was very clear by the cheater's defensiveness and overall behavior in our sessions that the affair was ongoing. It is our job to believe and gently challenge our clients rather than investigate, but that was definitely tough. Non-cheater ended up figuring out that the affair was ongoing and cheater admitted it. I made clear that I was choosing to believe the cheating partner and gave them the tools/accountability to make it work and was objective and balanced, but also make it very clear that without honesty in therapy we were going to go nowhere. It is essentially impossible to make lasting, authentic, ongoing process when there is ongoing secrecy/affairs. Me and my ex. He was a narcissistic abuser. Counselor in me, Ann Arbor, blatantly told to L.E.A.V.E. he would never change. Took my 3 kids, all under 5, and bolted. Happily divorced for 25 years. Question: my mother has started dating a new man. He constantly interrupts her and barely lets her talk, disagrees with all of her points only to say the exact same point in his own words a few moments later, in a condescending baby voice, which my mom calls playful. He tells her what she's doing is wrong and X is a better way to do it. Why are you eating your chicken leg with a knife and fork? You eat it with your hands, sweetie. Like this. Imagine this in the most infuriating high-pitched baby voice that makes you want to slap both of them. Are these red flags? Or am I just being biased and comparing him to my father? I mean, come on man. Let the woman eat her chicken how she wants. Fuck off. Edit, italics. I am no therapist, but I found Professor Gothman's analysis about the 4 things that kill a relationship very helpful in identifying major red flags in most relationships. These are not set in stone, and probably there are other things that are major red flags, but this is a good guide. Criticism, the kind of criticism that is meant or ends up making you feel worthless/useless. The kind of criticism that makes you feel like you cannot change and you should feel very lucky that your partner/so is still putting up with you. This criticism is always negative, never constructive, and is used as a way to keep your behavior in check or as leverage. Even if you try to improve, it's still used as a reminder of your past, not letting you move on. Sometimes criticism is right, but is it righteous? Is it coming from a place of love and care, or is it coming from a bad/negative place? Sometimes criticism is merely someone projecting their own negative traits and bad energy onto you. 2. Contempt. After getting so much criticism, now your partner/so has contempt for you. It's at this stage that your relationship is truly in the trash can. Why? Sometimes criticism could come from a genuine place of heart but just delivered badly. It's not what you criticize but how you criticize. But contempt means I no longer value your opinions, input, anything you say. Contempt comes out in all sorts of ways: jokes that are demeaning, personal and insensitive, being mocked or made to feel worthless in front of family, strangers and friends. 3. Defensiveness. You seem to be the one to blame for everything going wrong, even for your partner's/so's bad behavior. Everything seems to point right back at you. It seems like every one of your so/partner's behavior is perfectly justified, and you're the one to blame for anything bad happening in the relationship. At this stage, there is no admitting when wrong. It's all about point scoring to prove one is better than the other. 4. Stonewalling. The way I see this is like waking up and finding the Rock of Gibraltar between you and your partner. You are now completely on different pages of life, different wavelengths, different life journeys, and now totally disengaged or uninterested in each other's life or whatever. You know you have hit the rock bottom in a relationship if it feels like you are more alone in it than outside of it. It feels like you talking to yourself even though your partner/so is right there in front of you. It seems like you the only one wanting to make things work. At this stage, a very manipulative partner/so will try to hide it by making excuses why they are disengaged/uninterested, etc. Others, at this stage, don't care and are now throwing their toys out the pram, and doing all their best to stonewall you as a way to get back at you. I feel like at 1 you can still work things out, 2 is a toxic relationship, a lot of tit for tat going on further making it worse, 3 and 4 the relationship is on life support with no hint of any surviving. The 4 horsemen: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. I had one couple where the wife tried to stab her husband with a knife for cheating on her, and he later manipulated her into believing that he was actually sexually assaulted instead. She had a history of sexual assault herself, so it was a sore spot for her, and she guilted herself for not helping him. He let their neighbor into his house while she wasn't home twice, and they had sex twice and were also sending flirty messages via text back and forth the whole time. But he claimed he was being controlled by the neighbor. I could tell by his body language and the way he said all this that he was lying. Also, another thing about couples counseling is that it can't be effectively done with ongoing domestic violence concerns. When I suggested to the wife that we should focus on individual psychotherapy for herself first, she stopped coming to session. Yikes. I'd say this. If you fight over small things like where to eat dinner, then chances are you will really crash and burn when it comes to, say, buying a house, career support, and raising children. Also, if you can't be 100% free to speak your mind about what you think or feel. GTFO. Relationships are partnerships. If you're not supporting each other equally, then you're really just asking for pain and disappointment. If one person is saying they want to stop triggering the other person to behave aggressively. I work with lots of couples where one person is aggressive and wants to take responsibility and change. But if the person who is being targeted is taking responsibility for the aggression and the aggressive partner_isn't_t_ taking responsibility, I will work with the targeted partner on leaving or setting limits, but that I won't help them be a more patient target. As half of a couple, in couples therapy, I decided to get out when I asked my husband if he tried to make me feel stupid on purpose when he corrected me frequently, and he said it's just that you're brilliant, and I have to knock you down sometimes to make myself feel better. Ironically, also a therapist, but I see children smile. Any episode of 90 Day Fiancé should sum it all up for you. When the other person truly refuses to take any responsibility for anything in the relationship going wrong, just because they didn't intend for something to be insulting or hurtful to them, meant I wasn't allowed to take it that way. Denial they may have about dealing with feelings, issues, anything else. I am in couples counseling now, trying to spot my therapist in the comments. Lol. I was just thinking of the show Ozark when, spoilers, both Marty and Wendy were bribing their therapist to take their side. I was working at a dual diagnosis substance abuse treatment facility. My clients would stay for 7 to 30 days for 24-hour care. I had a difficult client, Jay. Jay wore ridiculous clothes all the time for attention. Jay was in their mid-40s and would wear their significant other's 12-year-old kids' shirts. They didn't fit Jay. Jay also was constantly involved in drama at the facility. I was not Jay's individual therapist, but Jay requested me since Jay knew Jay was fucked in the head and I was the most educated counselor at my facility. Jay was a sociopath, but fully aware and admitted it. Jay didn't like the life Jay had and knew being a sociopath was the cause. Jay being a sociopath was from Jay's upbringing. When Jay first came to the facility, Jay lied about everything during intake. Jay just was released from jail and was staying with a roommate. Jay's significant other didn't want Jay back at So's house after Jay was released from jail. Jay was at our facility fraudulently. Jay claimed So was Jay's spouse of 2 years when in reality the So was boyfriend/girlfriend level and that they were only together for under a year. Jay was unemployed and under So's insurance as a spouse. Facility was $1,000 a day without insurance. Jay wanted me to help So regain trust and let Jay move back in. Jay was a compulsive liar and I had to background check Jay's entire life in order to get a glimpse of Jay's actual life. Jay cheated on So constantly, which is why So was done with Jay. That and the domestic violence. At the facility Jay was constantly trying to flirt with other clients. Jay would have fucked almost any of them if given the chance. During couples therapy sessions Jay was constantly caught lying. Jay would get caught, confess, claim nothing else would come up, rinse and repeat. Jay was making slow progress. Sociopaths and psychopaths are difficult clients to make steady progress with. The fact that Jay was only in rehab in order to prove to So that Jay changed so that Jay could return to So's house to continue to live for free made progress even harder. Jay liked their life with drugs, just not as a homeless person. Jay constantly begged me to call So and tell them about the amazing progress Jay was making. I said I refused to lie for a client, but authorized me to talk to So with a signed release of information consent form. I spoke with So privately. I didn't take a side, or push So, but it sure as hell let them know what they were dealing with. Jay had no desire to change and was clearly just being a parasite on So. Jay would glorify cheating and drug use during group sessions. Jay bragged about how Jay could fuck anyone and that So allowed it. The release Jay signed allowed me to openly talk about all of Jay's issues. And a big part of his treatment was getting to the point of wanting to change, which clearly Jay had no real plans to do. Shortly after I exposed Jay, the insurance thing caught up and Jay was transferred to another facility. I hope So used my information properly. There was no getting it to work out, so I went the route of saving the victim. Ethical gray area, but morally and legally I'm in the clear. These are composites. Pre-marriage counseling. A couple who were both in recovery, one was changing their views on whether they could/should maintain complete sobriety. After several sessions, I told them this was a chasm, a truly incompatible matter, and this issue would divide them. It did. 2. Pre-marriage counseling again. One was pressuring the other for money through electronic devices, and in a way that was a lot like theft, obtained one. I helped them resolve this issue and encouraged them onward. One ended up being a very bad person, continued in deception. Marriage over in 5 years. In the first case, they suddenly became incompatible. In second, greed and secrets destroyed it. Ideas matter. Character matters. I've had a few clients who had kids because it would bring them together. That's definitely a red flag. So far as getting them to work it out, it's complicated. I want what is healthy for my clients, but clients have their own autonomy and are, obviously, free to do as they please. My personal feelings on the matter shouldn't be a factor when working with a couple, makes staying objective really hard. Sometimes it's really hard to follow that. Had a couple where one partner was incredibly cruel all the time to the other. I'm talking every second of the day. I wanted to look at the other partner and tell them to ditch this jerk. But the abused partner still expressed love for the other, so I had to set myself aside and approach with a neutral stance. 2 years married, fresh kid, fresh house, and this thread is giving me the creeps re my relationship. Therapist, here. Couples therapy is for the purposes of determining whether or not it's beneficial or healthy for y'all to be together. If a therapist says they are there to break y'all up or save your marriage, run fast. After reading thought, a lot of these people should really look up the 8 signs that the person you're dealing with has a personality disorder. Once you see one of them, run, don't walk. There's no need to wait for its 6 or 7 other friends to show up, they aren't any better. Just want to point out that not everyone commenting is a couple therapist, and if they are, they might not be experienced. Also, generic fits-all advice is not reliable when it comes to relationships. So for anyone drawing conclusions based on comments here, be careful. Every situation is different, and is best understood in face-to-face meetings with an experienced listener/counselor/therapist. Once, I had a live-in girlfriend call 911 and say, "I am afraid for my life." The astute operator, an older black woman, asked, "Has he hit you?" "No." "Has he threatened you?" "No." "Has he raised his hand toward you?" "No." "Has he even raised his voice?" "No." "Ma'am, the 911 service is for emergencies. Please do not call with this kind of thing again." When our therapist heard this, she just sat up straight in her chair and said, "Oh. Well. I can provide you counseling as you complete your breakup, but there are certain things that we counselors agree no relationship can ever come back from. This is one of them." I went to one session and it was really the final catalyst for divorce. My wife at the time was wanting an open marriage and claiming all sorts of mental health issues. For the mental health issues, she was not getting the answers she wanted from professionals to validate her, so she started making things up. For the open marriage, I was completely against it. By the time we went to therapy, I was already so emotionally drained and hopeless. I'm not sure how she felt, but she couldn't understand how I felt about all this and seemed more concerned yet again about getting this therapist to agree with her. He said something about how most marriages fail if they don't agree on something like this. I filed later that year, best decision I ever made. Have not been in a successful relationship since, but I'm understanding more about boundaries and things like that. I believe it was Dr. John Gottman who was able to predict within the first 5 minutes of an interaction with 80% accuracy whether or not a couple in his therapy would get divorced. It was mostly based upon behaviors of contempt from one of the partners, I believe. My personal theory is that if you're negatively immature one another for too long, it's done. Move on. Triangulation of the kids. Oftentimes kids will show symptoms because they're subconsciously trying to even out the imbalance between the parents. So I will see a family for therapy and immediately can tell that the issue is not so much with the kids but with the way the parents communicate. Helping them structure themselves and get the power back into their hands by getting them on the same page often helps the kids adjust and cope. Imagine getting inconsistent consequences from your parents all the time, so you don't know when you'll get in trouble and when you won't. You'd get hypervigilant, or perhaps you just give up and start doing things your way. Either way, you're trying to understand a situation that you can't control, so of course you're going to start acting weird or misbehave. Now imagine if your parents set consistent rules for you and gave you the choice to behave or misbehave and receive a predictable, reasonable consequence. You're going to know where you stand and be less anxious because you feel in control. So here was my problem with couples counseling. My ex-wife used it to remember shit I had done years prior and then wouldn't shut up about it until the next session.